Today's episode is brought to you by the Greenman Group, a European investment and operations group investing in and operating the essential sustainable assets for our future. The Greenman Group focuses on three pillars: sustainable investing, real assets such as real estate and agriculture, as well as green energy infrastructure. What makes the group unique is its integrated model. It doesn't just finance these assets through its network of businesses, it builds, manages and optimises its pillars for the long term. This approach is designed to create durable value from the ground up. To learn more about investing in or being involved in the real assets shaping a sustainable future, you can visit the Greenman Group's website at thegreenman.group. Hello and welcome to Path to Power. Slightly different edition this week. If you're looking for the politics of the week, well, John Deasy will be joining me on the Path to Power bonus edition for subscribers to talk about everything that's been happening this week, including Fine Gael's sudden interest in a united Ireland and many more stories besides that as well. But what we're doing on today's Path to Power is, as I said, something different that Lise Hand and myself have decided to do to mark what was, I think, a very significant event in our lives, a very significant event for Ireland as well. Next Friday, the 26th of June, will be the 30th anniversary of the murder of Veronica Guerin. Veronica Guerin was a journalist who worked with both Lise and myself, but wasn't just somebody who worked with us, somebody who became a very, very good friend of both of ours separately. And we decided that it would be appropriate to look back on the memory of Veronica, talk a bit about Veronica as the person that she was. And by God, was she some person. She was just a phenomenal character, but also to talk about her work and to talk about the circumstances of her murder, the political reaction to that, because this is a political podcast, and also, I suppose, the legacy, what actually happened because of the political changes that were made in relation to the laws for tackling drug crime and just how well or not so well they've worked out. So that's what we're going to do today. And I don't know really in some respects where to start. 30 years ago, half a lifetime ago for me, I would have been 29, just about to turn 30 when it happened. And there are moments in your life, and I think, you know, the things that I can remember the most are things like my parents when they died, although that was sort of expected. But the shock of Veronica's murder that day was just something that I don't think will ever leave any of us who knew her so well.
No, I mean, I don't think it'll leave anyone who was of a certain age at that time. I mean, over the years since, the amount of journalists I've met even, and young journalists, who said that even when they were kids, they remember where they were when. And I think her murder was a where were you when moment. And I think for the wider Irish society, it was a shock because this was a civilian. I mean, her death, let's not forget, came only a few short weeks after a member of the Garda Síochána, Detective Jerry McCabe, had been murdered.
And Ben O'Sullivan, who was so seriously injured as well. He had life-changing injuries.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right to include him in that.
And Veronica also spent time down there at the funeral and writing for the Sunday Independent about this. And sorry to cut across you. I promise I'll do as little cutting across you as possible. But I remember at the time, you know, and sorry, that what the politicians said afterwards, subsequently, and it's in books by various politicians, that this felt in the space of a few weeks that this was almost an assault on the integrity of the state. This idea that the Adair post office robbery, which had been come across by the two Gardaí, and that they had been so brutally killed in those circumstances, and we might even get to that political fallout of that. And then a few weeks later, that a journalist was murdered, almost by individuals who may have seemed to think that we'll just kill her, get her out of the way, and everyone will forget about it. But this was an assault almost on Irish democracy.
I mean, there's no doubt about it, Matt. It was. I mean, you had first you had the killing of a member of the Garda Síochána, but I think that was shocking enough. But then this was a civilian, a journalist, a wife, a mother, daughter, just like in many ways an ordinary woman, even though she was extraordinary on many other ways. But she was gunned down on a busy intersection, one of probably the busiest intersections in the Dublin road network, in the middle of the day. Sun was shining, lunchtime, and she was literally gunned down. And I think it was the sense that in both those cases that you had a massive criminal network that were operating without any fear of retribution and with complete impunity. Whatever, and this is not to in any way lessen the awful thing that happened to Detective Gordon McCabe, but he was somebody that was on the front line of law enforcement. There was always, I suppose, it carries a risk. She was a civilian and she was incredibly well known. And you see, this is the thing that, like, she was really well known. I mean, her face was known everywhere. I mean, you know, in the best possible way, she was a sort of celebrity journalist. And this didn't sit well with her on many levels. But, you know,
didn't sit well with a lot of her colleagues either.
Well, it certainly didn't. And, you know, it's a hell of a competitive business. And I think, you know, that it was because the paper she's working for at the time, the Sunday Independent, was the largest selling paper. It was huge. It had a huge readership. And it became her pieces became go-tos, because we'll get into this a bit more, but she was doing a certain type of journalism that really hadn't been done before. And it was kind of compulsive viewing. And her journalism was having real life effects on how business was done, both in the criminal world and by the Gardaí. So this was a woman of great consequence that was very famous. But also she had that other wonderful quality. She had massive likability factor. Everyone she talked to liked her.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is also the other thing was she, you know, people met her and they just immediately fell for her, right? She could wheedle information out of anybody. She could talk to anybody. She had that great ability to elicit information from people, but also just make them laugh. You know, she would literally light up a room. She was one of those people that would light up a room when she walked in. And
that's not an exaggeration, although I do have to tell you that, you know, you do have me to thank for the fact that you became such a great friend with hers. Because when she started working in the Sunday Independent, not long after, she rang me and said, "What's this one Lise Hand like?" She says, she seems very friendly, but she's talking about going over to Manchester United matches. I mean, is she full of shit or is she on for this, right? And I actually vouched for you and actually said, "I don't know, she's dead sound." And she actually is a genuine football fan. So anyway,
well,
then you ended up going to Old Trafford on many occasions.
Well, that was it. I mean, our literal first conversation was she bustled into the newsroom as she did. I mean, this is a journalist who spent as little time in a newsroom as she could possibly get away with, which, by the way, is what a journalist should be like. And she immediately just started slagging me about Man United. But she did very quickly realise that I wasn't, quote unquote, full of shit. And I did actually know what I was talking about. And it was one of those things where you just click with somebody straight away. We're both gregarious individuals, you know, say sort of, you know, like a laugh, full of energy. And I think the first conversation was a massive argument about which one of us, Eric Cantona, would fancy more. And which is an argument that literally ran the whole way through our entire friendship. And
you got to meet him as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, this was we travelled over and back to games, and this was actually it was his last home game before he played the away game that got him banned, right? So they were playing
Crystal
Blackburn
Palace.
Rovers.
Even I can tell you, Crystal Palace, when he jumped in Sellers Park, jumped into the stand to kick a fan.
That's right.
And he wasn't wrong either.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I am with you on that one. And that's great coming from even a Leeds man.
Well, he won his first league title with Leeds, remember?
He did, and then just got robbed. So, cut a long story short, Veronica had been going over and back on the ferry since she was like a young teenager, and everybody would sort of mind her on the ferry. But so she was a veteran of going over, but she had never before managed to get into the Holy of Holies, which is the Players' Lounge, which is where the wee bar in the stadium in Old Trafford where the players go to chill after a match. I had an incredibly good source, a couple of really good sources for such tickets. So we rolled in anyway, and I think we had I think we might have even bought a disposable camera or something. I'm not really sure.
These are in the days before you had cameras on phones.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And my two strong memories of that were Pauline said won man of the match, and I literally caught her eyeing up the trophy and looking at the size of her handbag, and I went over going, Veronica, you really can't rob that. And she's like, but why not? He has loads of them. So I think I managed to get her to put it down. But anyway, Eric Cantona suddenly turns up in the room, and he was this incredibly imposing figure, and he beautifully dressed in a suit. So anyway, I kind of, it didn't take him much to see the imploring faces of two birds, like in colours. Everybody else was in civvies. So he rolled over, and I lined herself and himself up, and I got a gorgeous photograph. And I think it was one of the few times I saw Veronica Guerin actually speechless after that. She literally couldn't talk for about 5 minutes. And I think we both literally sweated it out when we sent the roll of film in to be developed in case it didn't turn out. I sweated it out because she probably would have just come and burnt down my house or something if that photograph hadn't happened. But, I suppose then on kind of poignant note was, like, that was a photograph framed and that was placed on our coffin on the day of her funeral.
Oh.
Yeah. So, but she was, she used her love of Man United, which was genuine. It was a great way to start conversations with people as well, particularly in a very male-heavy environment of the world of police and the world of
Bertie Ahern
crimes.
in his memoir, and we'll get to this a bit later, does mention that he used to meet Veronica all the time, going over and back to Old Trafford and stuff, and they'd talk more about football than they would about politics. And I will get to her involvement in Fianna Fáil in a little while, but I actually just remember the first time I met her. And it's amazing with Veronica, the stuff that you would remember, because she made such an impact. She had this presence. She started doing work for the Business Post, and she was writing stuff. Aileen O'Toole, the news editor at the time, would have been editing her material. And eventually, I think Aileen just felt took a little bit too much time. And I was given the responsibility for looking after Veronica's copy, which is why we became such really good friends. But the first time she met me, and she just looked at me and she was introduced to me and she goes, "You?" I said, "What do you mean me?" She goes, "You're Matt Cooper, yeah? Who writes in this paper, yeah? You're only a child." You're just a child. What are you doing right? But she did it in such a way that you would just laugh.
Yeah.
And you warmed to her. She had this extraordinary ability to make connections with people.
Well, that was it. And, her ability to empathise with people as well. I mean, the whole reason, I know I'm jumping forward here slightly, but I mean, the whole reason that she probably ended up writing about the criminal underworld was she felt massive, massive empathy for the people of the North Inner City who had been absolutely and utterly destroyed by heroin in particular and by the scourge of drugs. And she could see the devastation it had brought, and it enraged her that the guys that were importing these drugs and more than selling but importing were just getting away with it. So she would talk to these people, though. I mean, she wasn't one of those people who operated from an ivory tower, never left the office and just assumed people were miserable. I mean, she went out and, she would talk to people on the ground, and she talked to community activists every bit as much as she talked to detectives and, the brass and the guards, and also some incredibly shady figures, because she had that empathy. And I think, and she, as you know, she was never in the office. Her car was her office. And at a time when mobile phones, were still not everybody had a mobile phone. I'm not even sure I had, but she had two.
Yeah, well, I tell you, she got us in big trouble once with the mobile phones, because she came into the Business Post one day. This was in 1992, and Aileen O'Toole was on maternity leave at the time. So I was acting news editor, working with Damien Khyber, the editor. And she came in with tapes of conversations that had been illegally intercepted on mobile phones involving the likes of John Bruton and others, right? Mm-hmm. And I suppose, young and naive news editor as I was at the time, all I could see was scoop rather than worrying too much about the illegality of the
As
content.
opposed to seeing jail.
Yeah, so I was saying. So basically, anyway, we wrote up the transcripts. I can't even really remember what was in them. There wasn't too much in them, but it was almost the sense of just having the stuff. And I also remember that we did up shorter audio versions for the radio stations, and I went around on the Saturday afternoon delivering them to local radio stations and things to get them on air to promote the Business Post. So all hell breaks loose when this story emerges that Veronica has. And then I got summoned to go to Garda HQ. And I went with Eugene Murphy, who's long since dead. He was our solicitor in the Business Post. And he brought me up and he advised me not to answer questions and all the rest of it. And I got told by the Gardaí, that this was a very serious matter and I could expect consequences from it. And then what happened was both Veronica and Damien Kybert got prosecuted.
Oh,
and I didn't, right? And Damien was the editor. It was his responsibility. Veronica was the reporter. But even though I was very much involved in things, and the two of them was, how the hell did you manage to get away? And they both got convicted, actually.
That's right. They paid a fine.
Yeah, I think Veronica had a fine of about 400 quid and Damien had a fine of about 600 quid. And if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong on this, I think Veronica was a little bit worried that it might stop her getting into America for the World Cup in 1994.
Oh, yeah. So it must have been your baby face that got you off the hook there.
Yeah, so, it was a couple of years before that.
Well, you see, this is the thing. I mean, she ended up having a real nose for a story and for a scoop. I mean, this is the thing. She got a hold of, she was a great Bishop tracker.
Yeah.
So that's, she really was. I mean, first there was Eamon Casey and then she also tracked down Brendan Comiskey. And I know this for fact because I'm jumping again slightly forward here.
That's fine. We can weave. Marion and myself from the American edition weave all the time.
This is a good weave and a stagger. Yeah. And because the Brenda Comiskey, I think, summed up her completely, was at that time she had been under guard protection. Right, this was after a couple of incidents at the house, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And she decided she couldn't operate like this, so she asked for her protection to be removed. And typical of Veronica, she decided to hold a drinks party for them in the house to sort of thank them.
Yeah,
it was one of those marvellously sociable houses. There was an actual bar in it, built by her wonderful husband Graham Turley, and kind of one of those kitchens where you always sit around. I mean,
she was so proud of the house. I mean, despite the fact she was out so much, she just loved the house. It was a small stone cottage up in Cloughrane, and then with an enormous extension built onto the back, including the bar areas you talked about.
Yeah.
And she used to love showing you around it.
Oh, she absolutely did. And, it was very sociable. On this particular occasion, she decided she'd have all the detectives and all the security detail who were minding her. And I think I was in a taxi going out to the house, and she rings me and she says, "Look, you're going to have to hostess the party with Graham." And I'm like, "This is your party. Where are you?" She says, "I'm actually in the airport. I'm about to fly to Florida. I've tracked down Bishop Comiskey." And I'm going, I mean, I talked to her about 4 hours beforehand and she wasn't going to Florida. So, this is literally the kind of person. She was just laughing. I mean, I went mad and she just laughed and laughed. And then when she landed, the first thing she did was picked up the phone and rang the house to see, I think, United had been playing in Europe or something, and she wanted to know the score. So, I mean, it was so typical, and you could never stay mad with her for more than 3 or 4 minutes. But, herself and Graham had this brilliant house. And they did socialise in it. And even when there was a couple of guards who'd be outside the door, they'd never stay there. They'd end up in the kitchen.
Yeah.
That lovely big warm roundy kitchen with the aga and the big round table. And I mean, she'd just inveigle them in and then feed them tea and sambos and then get a story out of them. So, which was fairly typical of her as well,
Although, of course, and I suppose this is relevant, there was a device thrown at the house at one stage and then she was shot at home, shot in the leg.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think at that time, Gerard Hutch's name was mentioned. He was the chief suspect, but she always believed it wasn't him, that it was somebody else.
Yeah, she did. I mean, this was because she started doing her stories, were a mixture of a little bit of politics, but mostly sort of probably business orientated stories. But then, of course, she did come, turn around and start, and we'll talk about the sort of process and how she developed that. But she did put herself, her head was way above the parapet in terms of attracting attention from nefarious people, which did lead to shots being fired in the house. At one stage, luckily there was nobody in the room. She had been in the room, had just left it. But the night you're referring to was the 30th of January, 1995. And
You were on the phone to her, weren't you?
I was on the phone to her.
Yeah.
Because we were going to, it was the night of the Sunday into Christmas party, Maria, the end of January, but that's the way they rolled. And of course, her being a North Sider and the party was in deep South Side, so I was literally giving her directions. And she was on her cordless phone and she just went, look, somebody's at the door. And I said, look, take the phone with you because if you never ring me back. Yeah. And she said, no, I'll call you back. Of course, she never called me back. So I swore and, went to the party. And then, of course, we heard the shocking news. And it turns out that the gunman had gone to the front door of the house, which is the one they never used. And when she opened it, there was somebody in a motorcycle uniform, a motorcycle gear and motorcycle helmet. And they pointed a gun at her head. And then she ended up with a bullet in her leg. And like she herself described it at the time. And, obviously she was shocked. Her family were completely shocked. Everybody was shocked, but I think it was indicative of two things, I think, Matt. A, it was how much that she was rattling them.
Yeah.
But I think B, it was indicative of the rising confidence among the nefarious classes that they could do this kind of thing.
And I say this against certain people in the media without naming names, but there were one or two journalists started putting it around. She shot herself.
Oh yeah,
right. Which I remember thinking at the time, go away. Don't be so jealous. Don't be so petty. These are people who I really thought more of than that they would actually say something like that. And I say they regretted ever saying it when she was subsequently murdered as well. I just thought this was, but there was this jealousy. And actually later that year as well, she, the Journalist Awards that year, they gave her a special award and I was sitting with her and she was actually not particularly happy in saying like, they're giving me an award for getting shot. And I was saying, look, they're not, but maybe they were, but she had an entire body of work which had made her deserving of one of the Journalist Awards. I mean, like, did she win for the Bishop Casey scoop? If she didn't, she should have, so.
Yeah, I don't know whether it was for that, but I mean, she definitely should have. But again, she got that because she fostered a relationship with him, a professional relationship with him. She gained his trust.
And of course, it was very important in that as well. I mean, the ironies in this, she got that story for the Sunday Tribune, right? And the Sunday Independent, I think, Sunday Independent before that had concocted a front page interview with Bishop Casey. Wasn't it Gordon Thomas who went but he actually hadn't done the interview. And the Sunday Independent was on the back foot in relation to it. And then Veronica got the story for the Sunday Tribune, where she worked for only about a year. When I left the Business Post, she then decided to move on from the Business Post and she went to the Tribune. And I don't think it's unfair to say she didn't get on with Vincent Browne. One of the few people she didn't really get on too well with was Vincent Browne. And that meant then she got that story, delivered the big scoop for the Tribune. But then the Sunday Indo wanted her and the Sunday Independent persuaded her to move over in early 1994.
Yeah, and I think really that's really where she kind of found her groove. Because...
No, she had found her groove before that.
No,
Sorry, she was doing great stuff before that.
No, you're right. Absolutely. I take that back. But I think, perhaps she kind of went to a different level because she understood that, as we were saying, she felt really deeply the injustice of having all these guys running around. And, they were driving around in flash cars. They were throwing money around like confetti with no visible income. There was very weak legislation. The guards, the policing of them was pretty milquetoast. So there was an awful lot wrong. So she understood that the libel laws, obviously, she used to rail against the libel laws being as strict as they were. Well, I mean, every journalist worth their soul does that, let's face it. So I suppose she developed a way of doing something different. So she brought these guys out of the shadows, and she did that by, say, giving them a catchy name, right? There was, some of them had been given by others, but you had like the boxer, you had the coach, you had the warehouse man, and then describing them in vivid detail. So they came out of the shadows and they took shape. She gave them physical descriptions. They didn't like that. And her one North Star, the one thing that she always said was, and she said it on various interviews that she did, follow the money.
Yeah.
Like, she was so ahead of her time really on that. Now, she had a background, in accountancy and so on. So,
because her late father had an accountancy practice where she worked after she left school.
Precisely, exactly. So, she had that, which a lot of journalists, of course yourself, I know that you're a figures whiz, Matt, but, a lot of journalists, wouldn't necessarily have that sort of sensibility of understanding that the best way to get to the root of something is to follow the money trail. It was reasonably unusual.
Well, let me tell you a little bit and go back again, and we will in time get to what happened after her murder and the political response. But just again, some of the stories that she did in her early days in the Business Post. She would have done major exposés and scandals at Aer Lingus Holidays, where she used her contacts in the travel trade to get information. She did an incredible story about Aer Rianta, and Aer Rianta was being accused, essentially. She got the information of, this is the Dublin Airports Authority, as it was known back then, state-owned company, but essentially getting involved in paying bribes in Pakistan to get business. And I remember where I sat down there, it took 2 days of literally going through all the material, putting it into the shape for a double-page spread of the Business Post. And of course, then when we got it all in order, we had to go to Aer Rianta to comment, and we did out a list of questions looking for their response in relation to it. And what they did was immediately took legal action to prevent publication. And I remember the Saturday morning we had to go down to the court, into the High Court, and this is so frustrating because what happened was all the other newspapers were able to come in and they were able to report on the injunction proceedings in which we laid out various things.
Oh, yeah.
The injunction was granted against us. We had to have 2 blank pages in the paper with the big strap injuncted across the pages. And the other papers were able to actually publish on Sunday what we had been prevented from publishing because it had been done in open court.
Yeah.
She also did some remarkable stuff on Larry Goodman got involved in a major financial transaction that went wrong involving 22 million quid. Now, 22 million quid would still be an enormous amount of money now, but you can imagine what that was like back in the early 1990s.
Huge, yeah.
And this was at a time just after he'd been bailed out by the government for the Iraqi lost 180 million quid, and the government had to come in to rescue him. And she did this incredible story in relation to all this. So she was doing all these business stories, and I'm just going to weave a little bit and jump forward again. A few years later, it would have been not long before she died. Or was it the year before? I'll have to go back and check on this. But anyway, and the funny thing was, it was at a time when Ivan Yates was the Minister for Agriculture, and it was after the report of the Beef Tribunal, which came out in 1994, and suddenly Goodman is persona non grata. Veronica rings me in the Indo, and I had a private phone on my desk separate to the main switchboard, which she always would have rung in on. And she says, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, obviously I'm here." She said, "Great. Can you get down to Larry Goodman's office in the next hour?" I said, "What? What are you on about?" And she goes, "Can you get down to Larry Goodman's office in Ballsbridge in the next hour?" And I said, "Well, if I have to, but why would I? He wants to meet you. He wants to talk." And I said, "Hang on a second. You're telling me that Larry Goodman wants to meet me. How the hell do you know that?" Right? And she goes, "Just shut up and get down." She says, "There's a story that's going to break. It won't hold until Sunday. If I can't have it for Sunday, you might as well have it now. So go down to the office." And basically what it was that Yates had made comments about Larry Goodman either in the Dáil or on television the previous day. And it got Goodman so irate that he decided to give me correspondence that he'd received from Fine Gael, begging for money, basically, looking for political donations.
Wow.
And showed me the dates and the letters on the letters after the publication of the Beef Tribunal report.
Wow.
And it was from the chief fundraiser in Fine Gael at the time. So I have all the documentary evidence. He's on the record. I go back to Fine Gael, and it was one thing. It was lead story in the Irish Independent the following morning, big furore politically and all the rest of it, as to why would Fine Gael be looking for money off Larry Goodman in the aftermath of the Beef Tribunal report. But her thing was she loved the story so much that if it wasn't going to, she said it wasn't going to hold, so she didn't want anyone else getting it. Yeah. So she said, you take that.
That's the thing. And you just hit something there. Like, she absolutely loved being a journalist. I've never seen somebody that loved it as much. I mean, as I said, she'd have the 2 mobile phones working at the same time. She'd be zipping around meeting people. And she was ferocious and in pursuit of a story as well. As I said, hopping on a plane at the moment's notice. Yep. She'd go anywhere, like at a drop of a hat. But she really loved it, and she loved the crack. And at the same time, like, she wasn't sort of, like, journalists tend to be pack animals. You know, we go out together, we drink together, you know, we tend to go around. Like, when she finished up, she was straight home to Graham and her little boy, Cathal.
Yeah.
Who was, like, she used to say, she always said, you're the light of my life, Cathal. And he was a lovely little fella.
Yeah.
But that was, so she had this kind of great life going on outside journalism. But, you know, she'd ring you. I mean, she rang me we'd normally ring each other on a Sunday afternoon, and we'd literally sort of go through the papers and what stories were good and what stories were crap. And I remember one Saturday afternoon, she rang me and she said goodbye to Graham Cahill. They were going out to a rugby match. And anyway, Graham Cahill arrived back in an hour and a half later, and Graham could not believe that we were still on the phone, you know. But, like, she would be going through every story and, you know, looking for maybe a lead. Like, she literally adored the business.
She did.
You know, and it suited her personality to a T. It really did, you know. So it's not surprising that when she was faced with a challenge like something about trying to unmask, criminals and nefarious people, that she would set about it with a serious determination and will.
Okay, we need to take a break, and we will come back, and we've loads more to talk about when we come back in this special edition of Pat to Power. Today's episode is brought to you by the Greenman Group. It's answering a critical question: how to invest in a sustainable future in real, tangible terms. Its answer lies in 3 areas: the energy transition, the places we live and shop, and the future of our food supply. The Greenman Group's strategy is to own and operate the physical infrastructure in these sectors, from solar energy generation and EV charging to agricultural projects and grocery-anchored real estate. By building, managing and optimising these areas via its investment and operational businesses, the group aims to build resilience and deliver long-term value. Explore its approach at thegreenman.group. Welcome back to Pat to Power. We're continuing just with one topic. We're talking about the life and legacy of Veronica Guerin, given that it's 30 years ago on Friday, June 26th, since she was murdered. One of the things I discovered, I was going back and I went at home, I started pulling out loads of old books, and I suddenly thought, I looked for Gary Murphy's biography of Haughey, because I thought there must be a mention of Veronica in there. And there is. And Cahill, who we've mentioned, was named after Charlie Haughey. Uh-huh. But the mention, it's actually, when you think about it, talk about getting near to the story. Do you remember how Haughey nearly drowned back in the 1980s? The Celtic Mist nearly ran aground. Himself and his sons were on it, and they just about survived. But they were waved off on their journey by Graham and Veronica, who had just been married, 1985. And they probably would have been on the Celtic yacht. At least Graham would have been, because Graham would have been very friendly with the Haughey brothers, and probably would have been on the ship with them, only for the fact that himself and Veronica were heading off on honeymoon. So that story is in Gary Murphy's biography of Haughey. That's
absolutely gas. And, you know, I know that both herself and Graham were both in Ógra Fianna Fáil.
They were. And I'm sure Veronica was the secretary for Fianna Fáil to the New Ireland Forum. during
That's
that
right.
period.
Yes,
And
she
very
was.
involved in Ógra Fianna Fáil. Now, I did sort of give out for, journalists shouldn't be involved in political parties, but that's just
She probably
another...
told you to go and shite or
She
something
did.
like that.
That way,
Because
you never go away and shite. That'd be it.
yeah, because I mean, this is the other great thing about her was, I mean, I am fairly profane. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, it can be quite a strain for me to do a podcast for an hour and not actually use like a bad word. But I mean, she had an absolute, she
Torrent of
swore like a sailor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But always in a massively entertaining way. Like that, that there's a sort of Dublin way of swearing that's absolutely brilliant. And she had that down to a T. She really did. And no matter, even if she was given out to you, she'd always, and throwing a few profanities your way, it was always done with a smile at the end of it, Like it's, that was sort of part of her personality as well. And again, that was all about just breaking down the barriers of people, She didn't even break them down, she just went straight through them, just didn't see they were there.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about what happened. And I suppose what happened was September of 1995, Veronica decided to confront a thug called John Gilligan. And she went to his house, and instead of sort of closing the door on her and telling her to go away, he beat her up very badly.
Yeah.
And I would actually say that I think that actually shocked her more than the shooting.
Yeah.
Right?
There's no doubt about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the viciousness of the assault was more than the shooting. And then made worse by the fact that she went to the Gardaí and the Gardaí decided that he'd press charges. And then he threatened her again in a phone call, but he didn't just threaten her, he threatened
Her
Cathal.
son. That's right, yeah.
And I do remember thinking, like, the Sunday Independent printed the details of that, whether that was a correct decision by the Sunday Independent to do that or not. There are certain times there are things that, you're not going to just get a front page story, that was better not published perhaps. Now that's a moot point and you can argue it and you can debate it and the rest of it. But I remember thinking at the time that's, going a little bit, putting that information into the public domain, I think maybe exacerbated things.
Yeah, I mean, it was, again, she was out driving around, decided to call in. I mean, this guy had a £4 million, 300-acre equestrian centre. Now, actually, no, it was his wife who, the place was in the name, was in her name. It was state of the art. And she went and asked the question, as I said, her North Star question, where did you get the money to fund this? I think his official address, I think, was Coolock, maybe, or Blanchardstown or somewhere. And she just asked him that. He turned on her, he ripped open her blouse and was going, where's the fucking wire? He assumed that she was wired. And he beat her up. And I mean, this, I actually saw the damage that he did to her, and he absolutely beat her black and blue. And you're absolutely correct. He followed that up with an absolutely disgusting, vile phone call to her the next day. As it happened, she was in the presence of a legal person, so who was able to back up that the voice was indeed him. So this went into legal proceedings, but I think that was the time where she started really thinking about perhaps seeing this court case through when this case came up. And it definitely would have ended up with a custodial sentence. I don't doubt it for a minute. And I think maybe she was looking to that point and saying, well, perhaps then I will start doing something else. I think this was, she would have stayed in journalism, but perhaps would have maybe moved into a different branch of it, started concentrating back on business but you see, this also, again, and this sort of feeds into what we were saying earlier on, it was, even though bullets had been fired into her house, she had been shot in the leg. And even she said this, and guards said this, and quite a few people said it, that there was still that, I suppose, expectation or understanding or belief, I think is the word, that it wouldn't go any further.
Exactly.
That because it just would not go any further. That these were warnings. They were horrible and frightening. But I think the gap to the next step was so unthinkable that no one really thought that was going to happen. I mean, Ireland was a different place then. There was still a sort
But
of...
sorry, no, there was a degree of savagery involved in a lot of the stuff that the IRA did in this island, and loyalist
Yeah, but that was
terrorists.
all IRA and
but it was all
loyalist.
sort of politically motivated
Yeah, and there was a
stuff.
huge spike. There'd been a huge spike around that time in gangland killings, but they were gangland killings. So
they killed each other.
They killed each other. So I think there was a sort of naivete, you might say, or a slight innocence about the notion that they would actually execute a civilian in the middle of a street. So I fairly think that she did probably. She was so shaken by that, and understandably, it was an absolutely horrible thing to happen. But I think around that time, that I think there might have been a career shift.
Yeah.
Once that court case had happened.
I always remember where I was when I got the news, because I was in a restaurant in Temple Bar, and I was actually with a friend of mine who was the marketing director in the Independent, Barry Brennan. You probably remember Barry. And Barry got the phone call literally within 15 minutes, I'd say, of it, because it had gone into the newsroom in Middle Abbey Street, but actually gone to the senior management, and they had to reassemble. And he just said it to me, and we were just absolutely in shock, and we just got up and walked out of the restaurant. We were just waiting for food. We just got up, walked. And I always remember that day, because I remember we went into Vinnie Doyle's office, and Vinnie Doyle was the editor of the Irish Independent, and Vinnie was in shock. And Vinnie started talking about, this is as bad as the Beaujolais day. And basically that, I was sort of at the time didn't quite understand, because that was a group of his friends, journalists from the Independent, were on this small aircraft that crashed and they were killed. They were doing this thing, the Beaujolais run over for the new wines and back. And I remember thinking at the time, like, there's no comparison here. That was an accident. This is murder. But afterwards, I suppose, as I got older and I sort of appreciated and understood, it was just sort of the shock. And he was thinking of his friends in the situation that they died. And I was thinking of my friend in the way that she died. And I remember just going through the rest of that day, and I had to get the rest. I had to get the business pages out, the business supplement as it was, because it was a Wednesday that she was killed, and we had the business supplement go out on a Thursday. And I had to finish up writing an interview with all people. Tony O'Reilly, I'd done an interview with him a couple of days, or I had to finish it to put it on the page, and then I just turned it over to my team. I remember numb and trying to write it. And I remember taking a phone call from a newspaper in England, can you write a piece? And I'm just like, Jesus, completely numb. And I remember going into the Oval pub downstairs, and I remember running into you, and you were in bits and everything. And then I remember going off at home, which was the time I used to live out in Blackrock. And I remember the next couple of days just been numb, absolutely numb. I think the following day I just would have been, it was just, I know when we talk about our experiences here, I mean, again, I can only imagine for Graham and for Cahill and for Veronica's mother and for her siblings and all of those around her, just the shock of it all. And the funeral was on the Saturday morning. And I remember thinking, the Independent, I kicked myself afterwards for going along to it. The Indo had their annual horse racing day, and they didn't cancel it.
Bizarre.
Right, it was bizarre. I remember being there, and you sort of know, you better go. And I said, and being there and going, why the is this going on?
That's
They
bizarre.
should have been cancelled and stuff, you know?
Look, I think a lot of people made, odd decisions. But
I don't think we were really thinking. I
Yeah.
remember being odd things. I remember one particular individual in the Sunday Independent who I know Veronica did not like, thought was a bit of an idiot, and him acting like he was a sort of an usher at the funeral, up in the church up in Dublin Airport
Yes.
night, and sort of pouncing around the place, like pushing people into positions. And I remember looking at him going, she thought you were a complete clown. know?
I know, exactly. Well, I mean, I had actually gone out to lunch with a friend of mine, and my phone was in my bag, and I probably had turned it off or something. They were the days when you used to do that. And I remember just before I left the office, the news desk, Willie Keeley, who was the news editor, had said, Veronica's on the line, she wants to talk to you. So he transferred the call, and it was probably about 1:15 or something. So it was probably within the last 10 minutes of her life. And we arranged, she told me she had got off the speeding. for anyone who doesn't know, she had actually, where she had been down in Naas District Court facing a judge who was brandishing a large sheaf of speeding tickets because she was a devil. And I think she tried to mount defence that she was improving because she was only done for doing 102 and not 103 like the time before.
Yeah.
But anyway, she was saying to me, brilliant, I got off, great, don't have to hand in my licence. And I'm going, fantastic, brilliant. She said, I'm coming into the office. And I said, great, I'm going for lunch. See you about 2:30. We have a coffee. And anyway, I was walking up Henry Street and the back door of the Independent was Princess Street. It was a small lane and it was linked by the GPO arcade, the small arcade. And they had a newsstand at the one end of the Henry Street end of the arcade. And as I strolled around, I saw a crowd around the newsstand and I actually went, that's bizarre. I've never seen that. You see it in,
the movies.
You see, moon landing, war breaks out. So slightly amused, I walked across and I see the late edition of the Herald and it just had Veronica Guerin shot dead. So I got myself up and I just said, no, they've obviously, and I kind of was a bit annoyed. I kind of went, I can't believe they actually made a mess of the headline. So I went back walked into Sunday Independent newsroom, genuinely thinking they'd made a mess of the headline and every face just turned towards me. They'd all been trying to get in contact with me. So then I knew. But the one thing I do remember from that afternoon was after about an hour, anyway, I'm sitting at my desk and I look up and God love her, there was a journalist from the Daily newsroom standing in front of me with a notebook and a pencil and an expression that says she'd rather be anywhere else in the world than standing in front of me looking for some quotes about Veronica. But to be honest, I looked at her and I went, okay, now I know what it feels like. Like as a news journalist, you've done these things before. You've had to take quotes from grieving people, from people in shock. And now I'm on the pointy end of the pencil. And I just thought, okay, now I know what it feels like. And it's amazing. You kick in, you do. And I'm sure you found this as well. And I'm sure anybody that's been in this position and has had to do something like this is, you immediately kick into, you want to try and do justice to them and the person they were and so on. But I also do recall there was a small period when the phones in the newsroom were quiet and then they just went completely mad. Because the thing about this, the story went global and international so fast. Ireland was suddenly, we were all inundated with media from all over the place. The United States particularly sent over loads of journalists.
Oh, yeah, GQ magazine decided to do a big piece, which,
Mike Sagar, his name was. I remember showing him around Dublin a few places. And actually the basis of that really, really long piece was about 8,000 or 10,000 words. I think that actually formed I think he sold the rights to that, which eventually turned into the Veronica Guerin movie starring Cate Blanchett. But I think it was on the back of that. But it was like the general public it was like a seismic shock. I remember standing outside the Leinster House maybe a day or two later, probably the day before a funeral, and it was a wall of flowers. There was just these were just from normal people. It was just an entire wall of flowers. There was massive anger turned towards the government immediately going, you let this happen. You let this happen. And as we saw, the government never moved quickly. They recalled the Dáil almost immediately. And within a record, and we'll get into this a bit more because I know you want to talk about Bertie, but within a record period of time, they had enacted legislation, and if I recall rightly, on her birthday, which was July the 5th, which basically brought into law things like the CAB and gave the powers of seizure of assets.
Yeah, let me just get the exact times this, right? And I went back to look into all of this, and there was stuff from Bertie Ahern's memoir. There was stuff from Rory Quinn's memoir as well. And Shane Kenny brought out a book, Under the Rainbow, only a couple of years ago, about that period in office when he was a government press secretary. And it was interesting, sort of different takes that they actually had in relation to what had actually happened at the time. And I'm just going to go down and find, Rory Quinn wrote about how John Bruton, he was Minister for Finance at the time, how John Bruton had contacted him as to what to say in the Dáil. I know that night in the Dáil, he described it as an assault on democracy and whatever, words which I think were given to him essentially by people from independent newspapers at the time, if I remember correctly. And so basically, Rory Quinn says, and it is his wife Liz suggested, Barry Galvin would be brought from, he was a solicitor in Cork, but he had been the state solicitor for Cork, and he had been taking on criminals, that he would be brought into a criminal assets agency. And there was a difference in the word there. It was later changed because the Garda Commissioner Papworth didn't want them compared with an agency like the US, so it became Bureau. There was also a row as to whether Gardaí could take instructions from civilians. So wasn't Chief Superintendent, maybe it was Faulkner Murphy, was given the job essentially with Barry Galvin was Chief Legal Officer, and Faulkner Murphy, who I think Veronica would have known well, was put in charge of it. So what actually happened was, and there was all sorts of discussions as to what actually would happen, but they had two pieces of legislation. There was the Proceeds of Crime Act, which was partly based on a private member's bill that had been brought in by John O'Donoghue, who was the Justice spokesman for Fianna Fáil, and which was adopted by Nora Owen as Minister for Justice. And the other then became law in October. The Criminal Assets Bureau Act was introduced by the Department of Finance. So those were two of the things. Now, Rory Quinn took credit for that. Bertie Ahern in his book, I thought in his memoir, and I was quite surprised when I went back and read it, I thought was very ungenerous towards, he was scoring political points on behalf of Fianna Fáil against the government at the time, saying it was all our idea, they had to bring in what we wanted to do. Whereas Rory Quinn was able to point out that the likes of Roisin Shortall, and I should have to find this now to make sure that I give due credit to the right person, and Joe Costello, they had already been campaigning within the Labour Party about the problems caused by drugs, and
they would have been in constituencies
they were looking for the seizure of assets and then to redistribute money back into the neighbourhood. But as Bertie Ahern also writes about in his book, Veronica had given a presentation only a few weeks or months earlier to the Fianna Fáil Parliamentary Party about the extent of the problem, the individuals, and had actually been working with John O'Donoghue in relation to what should be done. And again, I suppose what you say is that's not normally something journalists do, and it's different, but it shows the sort of the two things, the background of Fianna Fáil that she came from, but that she actually just so much believed that this had to be done, that there had to be measures taken to go after these people who were causing such mayhem.
Yeah, that was, exactly. And I think that but there was such an urgency around it because the outcry, around her murder was so intense, and as we said, it was a where were you when moment. That it was the speed at which this was actually brought, the legislation was brought forward and enacted, was head spinning.
It's certain things that you remember now because I've just suddenly got a flash. I just found the line. John Bruton in the Dáil that night said that a journalist should be callously murdered in the line of duty is an attack on democracy because it's an attack on one of the pillars of our democracy. And if I remember rightly, I think he was encouraged by the Independent to say that as he did. But I actually do now remember as well that I remember the night of the removal, which was Friday night, and the removal was out in Artane, I think, wasn't it? Out on the road coming in there. And I remember as we were driving back past the IFSC, listening to the news on the radio, and promises were being made. And I remember now I actually even remember exactly where we were on the road. And I remember just saying like, wow, it takes this to do what was obvious that should have been done.
Yeah. Well, I think it did. You see, I think it shook Ireland out of a complacency that was in existence in the establishment at that time. I mean, 1996, unemployment was still very high, but also wages were going up. People had disposable income to buy drugs, so there was ecstasy sales were through the roof, as well as the scourge of heroin in some, particularly in Dublin's north inner city and around the inner city. You had, it was, and yet there was, these guys really just had that sense that they were. I think she actually called them untouchables, because there was that sense of invincibility about them. And I think that this shocked everybody, saying we're grown up, we are a grown up country and now we have grown up problems, and we have let this network of gangs, all feuding, all trying to kill each other, but take root in the community, and nobody is actually doing them out. So I think it was a real wake up moment for Irish society as a whole, apart from the actual, the genuine affection like the wider public had for her.
I'm just quoting from Shane Kenny's book Under the Rainbow, and he wrote about things like they looked to reform the bail laws in relation to as he writes, that bail was a thorny problem because a number of crimes had been committed by accused prosecuted persons out on bail. The party leaders agreed that a referendum would be held later in the year to provide for the refusal of bail when there was a danger of other crimes being committed. Then there was things like the right to silence. The three party leaders at the time, Proinsias Rossa, Dick Spring and John Bruton, agreed to amend the law to allow inferences to be drawn by the court and drug cases where accused persons did not divulge to the investigating Gardaí alibis or other evidence that they later relied upon in their defence in court, but that could have been given to officers in their questioning. They weren't allowed to rely on those. And then we had things like there were genuine unique circumstances that we had when the trial came. First of all, John Gilligan was out, had left the country just before the murder.
The day before he flew to Amsterdam. Yeah.
So basically, we had the first witness turning state's evidence, a fellow called Charlie Bowden.
Yeah.
And he gave evidence against 4 other gang members, including Gilligan, in trials in the Special Criminal Court. What's really interesting is a lot of people, and again, there were 1 or 2 journalists who I felt, were sort of, for whatever reasons they had, were very much, oh, this is terrible. This is trampling on the rights of killers, right? Bowden's evidence actually was not successful in relation to most of the pieces. Gilligan was never convicted of Veronica's murder. There was a guy who I think is widely regarded,
and he
as
also denied. He always denied. He said that he knew he was the prime suspect.
Yeah.
So he admitted to that, but he never ever admitted that he had any hand, act or part in it.
And then you had guys, there was a gang member, a fellow called Russell Warren, and you had Brian Meehan, who was convicted of the murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, but I think he's out now at this stage.
I think he is in...
he left the country.
He might be just out, but it's recent, because I think he was given release from Sheldon Abbey last Christmas or something, so it's recent. So... and he was believed to have been the driver of the motorcycle. Yeah,
he wasn't the actual person who did the shooting.
No, he was the driver of the motorcycle, yeah.
Gilligan was tried and acquitted of the murder, but he was later convicted of importing 20 tonnes of cannabis. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison, reduced to 20 years on appeal. The Criminal Justice Bureau seized his assets, but it took years for them to actually get them, didn't it? Because again, it was all tied up in always his wife's and the rest of it. I think it took decades.
It went through appeals and everything.
It took decades before it actually then. But yeah, there was
and it was Patrick Duchy Holland.
Yeah.
He was never charged, but it is absolutely believed that he was the trigger man.
Yeah.
And he did 20 years for drug trafficking, and he died in jail in the UK. I think he had been ill, but again, he was never charged with her murder. So, again, for all the the laws and everything that came in, I think there's probably still a sort of sense of unfinished business over the fact that not everybody involved in that was brought to book. And
probably won't be now.
And probably won't be. There was a certain, apparently, and reported widely at the time, that a lot of criminals left the country and set up shop in other jurisdictions once these laws started coming in, and they moved their assets out of Ireland and so on. And there was a certain level of animus towards John Gilligan, who was allegedly behind, certainly the mastermind, or had some hand, act or part to play in it. But there was a lot of animus towards the people who perpetrated this, because it brought unwanted heat on them. I mean, this did turn over the rocks. And so everybody could have a look to see what crawled out from underneath them. So they had a grand little number going here. They were able to drive around to flash cars and flash the money around. And it was all fine and dandy. And her murder, her execution, you could call it really, that's what it was, just literally opens everybody's eyes. And next thing there was, new people were flexing new powers, new laws. But the thing that she had started, which was to to bring them out and describe them, this suddenly we could see them walking among us,
Yeah.
Then it was they were walking among us.
Of course, the other thing is, and 10 years ago, to mark her 20th anniversary of her death, there was a documentary made in RT, which I don't remember. I'd forgotten that I contributed to it.
Yeah.
When I was going back researching for our podcast today, I saw that a line of mine from the documentary was used in a few places at the time. That basically, I'm going to paraphrase here, but I said that when you're doing business journalism, there's a risk that businessmen may sue, but when you're dealing with criminals, there's a risk that they will use violence against you, and that's what actually happened in Veronica's case, that the people who were involved didn't turn to legal methods to silence her. They turned to the most illegal methods to silence her. And that was in 2016. And I think Graham contributed to it as well, from what I read back of it. And I think at that time there was a feeling that, what good are these laws actually doing? Because we'd had a resurgence in drugs crime. And that was the year of the Regency Hotel, wasn't it? Or was it 2018 or 2016? But anyway, that started the tit-for-tat murders between the Kinahans and the Hutches. And these gangs have grown. I suppose I was talking to somebody about it today as well, who described it as a bit like, sort of the mythical snake. You chop the head off and a new head just sort of re-emerges, regrows. And there's been an element of that. But I think in recent times, those laws about from the Criminal Assets Bureau and giving of evidence, have been used. And you can also say you can trust, despite the fact some of the naysayers, the Central Criminal Court, we had the Jonathan Dowdall was brought in as a protected witness, and the evidence he gave, the three justices of the Central Criminal Court came to a decision that it would be unsafe to convict Jerry Hutch. And so you can say that, for all the complaints, you have to have a jury of 12 people and all the rest of it. It isn't safe when you're dealing, just like it wasn't safe in the era of the IRA and intimidating juries. It's not safe when you have the criminal gangs, but you can trust the judges to correctly assess the evidence and come to the right decisions.
And there was, intimidation of witnesses allegedly in the original trial of John Gilligan as well, which might have actually made a difference to the verdict if that hadn't happened. So we are now in a situation where in 2026, 30 years on, that we are under no illusion just how dangerous the criminal underworld is now. That that it is incredibly dangerous. Anybody who puts themselves in their eye line, genuinely is risking their lives. But it's hard just to kind of it's hard to overstate how different 1996 was. I mean, it really is. Nobody thought that anything like that would absolutely happen. And there was also just such an energy to her as well, that she just appeared unstoppable. I mean, this was a thing. I mean, the amount of people that would lament after Veronica had gone off to do something, going, well, I tried to tell her, no, you don't have to go today, or you don't have to do this, and she'd just go anyway. So, she had this incredible energy, and, she did seem like people do talk about people being a force of nature, but she really was. All
right. I mean, the couple of things there, just as we come towards the conclusion in relation to that. I just started thinking there that she actually would be 30 years on. If she saw the state of the newspaper industry now, that newspapers don't sell a fraction of what they used to sell back in those days, because she was so loved newspapers.
Yeah.
I suspect Veronica might have been doing a podcast.
I was going to say that. She'd probably be sitting here opposite you telling you to go and try to be able to dance with yourself. I mean, I think, that's always, I suppose, what happens when, you lose somebody, and particularly she was just still so young,
I'm sorry, the other thing I was telling, and just our love of newspapers, I tell this story as I wrote about it 10 years ago, but she was like the star guest at my wedding, right? You can imagine, she was like the celebrity who was at it, and everyone back even in the mid-90s, everyone knew she was, and they wanted to get the photograph taken with her and all the rest of it. All my other friends from the media who were there, nobody knew who they were. They were in newspaper, everyone knew Veronica. But anyway, at about 9 o'clock the following morning, there's a banging at my bedroom door. I'd only got to bed about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, "What, Jesus Christ, what's going on here?" And I opened the door, and it's Veronica with the papers. "Are you not up yet?" And she marches in with the papers, and I go, "What are you doing? Get up, the pair of you, get up!" And I go, "What are you on about? Have you not seen the paper?" The way you were discussing earlier, she wants to go through all the Sunday papers, and I'm physically, Veronica, get out! I don't care. I'm taking 2 weeks off, and I had to push her out the door. I go, Jesus Christ, Veronica, give it a break for one day, will you?
Well, that is such a great story, and it is so typical. It really is. It's so typical. I mean, she was just so bold, I mean, that was the thing. She was so bold. She's great for getting you drunk as well.
Yeah, but not without getting drunk herself.
She'd just feed you drink, and you'd stagger out the door, and she'd be bright as a button,
Yeah. Michael Keeley and myself would have had that experience. Michael Keeley was the solicitor for the independent group at the time, and also an absolute football fanatic. We played on the same football team as well, so we'd have had nights out with Veronica in relation to football and stuff as well.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, you do think that, not only did sort of, Graham lose a wife and Cathal lose a mother, and Bernie lose her much beloved daughter, and her brothers and sisters lost a sibling. But I think I sometimes wonder what she would have ended up doing, or where she would have ended up eventually. I mean, I think a podcast is very likely. She might have gone into politics, she might have gone into NGO.
Yeah.
But I think she still would be a force to be reckoned with.
Buzzing around the place.
Yeah, I think she's
finding out about things.
Yeah, still a force to be reckoned with. I'd say she might have given up the fags by now, though.
All right, look, we will leave it there.
It was lovely talking about her. It's great, and it's people who wouldn't have known her. I hope maybe they just got a sort of a sense about what a special kind of person she was, and she did make a difference.
Yeah, my eldest is Auntie Veronica, named after her, and
lovely.
Hopefully I know she listens to the podcast, so hopefully she'll listen to this as well and find out a little bit more about the woman who was Veronica Guerin. Okay.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Lise Hand. And John Deasy is with us for the Pat to Power Subscribers Edition. We'll get into all of the politics of the week, and don't forget, Marion McKeown will be with me next Wednesday for Pat to Power America. There's one with Larry Donnelly available at present as well. So to Tom McAuliffe and Aidan Power for looking after the production tonight, thank you very much, and until the next time, goodbye.